dark hair, weary eyes. The boy ran his hands across his face, almost in disbelief, as if making sure he had really been reborn into the very world of his favorite game. And speaking of games, what's yours? For him, it was always the same, a sword and magic fantasy RPG known as Dungeon Brave, or Danure for short. Now, he found himself in its 40-second cycle. Day after day, he dragged himself through a dull life, but thanks to Danure, he managed to endure the gloom of his job. No matter how often he played, it never grew stale. The game was more than just battles. It let you grow close with the heroines, deepening bonds until they could even become your lovers. But let's return to the story. At this moment, the teacher was preparing to reveal the top scorers of the entrance exam, the classroom holding its collective breath. On the other side of the screen, our protagonist watched with eager eyes as the names were announced. 5th place went to Shell Uranus, a mage. 4th was claimed by Nagisa Sekai, a swordsman. 3rd belonged to Aerith Centria, a cleric. And standing above them all was Leon Praise, a spellblade. Leon wasn't just the top student, he was also the main hero of Danure, the chosen descendant who would lead the fight against the Demon King. The central journey of the game revolved around guiding Leon, strengthening his bonds with the heroines, and overcoming countless trials. Yet Danure was never just about its main quest. It brimmed with side events both large and small, the kind of hidden treasures that fans loved, and rumors whispered of even more secret encounters waiting to be uncovered, mysteries that made the game endlessly exciting for those willing to dive deep. One thing that makes the game even more exciting is how the characters' outfits can change depending on the story. Our devoted player often finds himself admiring just how stunning the heroines look. Truth be told, one of the biggest reasons Danure became such a hit was because it was an adult game. Our protagonist can't help grinning with flushed cheeks, thrilled at the thought of building a harem inside the game. Of course, it's not too over the top, but the moments of growing closer to the heroines are heart-melting. Many fans loved this balance. It gave both the thrill of classic RPG battles and the sweeter, more romantic side of things. Because of that success, Danure exploded into other forms of media, an anime, a manga, all kinds of merchandise. There was even an all-ages edition released with the adult content removed. Naturally, our gamer hero proudly owns figures of every character in his collection. But then, something strange happens. His head starts pounding, and though he blames it on exhaustion, he's never felt this kind of fatigue before. So, he decides to sleep it off. Now the scene shifts. A dark-haired figure with a sharp, intimidating aura steps into view. By the way, what kind of games do you dislike? For him, the answer is clear. He despises Dungeon Brave Soul 2. In that sequel, a background character who was barely mentioned in the first game suddenly becomes the lead. And here it is Leon, the hero of the original story, cheerfully calls out to that very figure. His name is Zenon. Dungeon Brave 2 begins right after Leon's great battle ends, when the Demon King has finally been sealed away. In the second game, the role shifts. This time, players control a man named Zenon. At first, he seems like nothing more than a quirky companion to Leon, but things quickly sour. Zenon worms his way into the heroines' trust, forming a party with them. Slowly, the girls begin to drift away from Leon, and the reason is cruelly clear. Zenon is stealing them one by one. What follows is twisted. He toys with the heroines in cruel and disgraceful ways, shattering Leon's bonds. At his lowest, Leon is even forced to witness Zenon violating one of the girls before his very eyes. Betrayed and broken, Leon can do nothing but beg in despair as the man he once called a friend takes everything from him. In the end, Leon's heart snaps. With nothing left to cling to, he shatters the seal and releases the Demon King. The world crumbles into ruin. What once was a stirring tale of courage and romance is twisted into a nightmarish NTR story. That is why our protagonist despises Danure 2 so deeply that he swore never to touch it again. But fate, or perhaps some divine trick, has other ideas. When he opens his eyes, he's staring at a grand ceiling carved with intricate designs. This isn't his bedroom. As he sits up, he notices something else. His body feels different, leaner, stronger, unfamiliar. The chamber itself is far too lavish to belong to him. Then, across the room, he catches sight of a mirror. Hesitant, he steps closer. The reflection staring back freezes him in place. No, it can't be. That face, sharp and dark, belongs to the one he despises most. Zenon Baskerville. His hands roamed across his face again and again, his knees buckling beneath him. What was happening to him? This is where the tale truly begins, the story of a gamer who finds himself reborn as the very villain he despised most. The reflection in the mirror left no doubt. That face, it belonged to Zenon Baskerville. Could this mean he had been dragged into the world of Dungeon Brave Soul? He clung to the mirror, staring into eyes that weren't his own, the eyes of the man he hated. His last memory was so ordinary, simply falling asleep. Yet now, he wore the face of Danure 2's infamous protagonist. Why Zenon, of all people? Had he done something so terrible in a past life to deserve being reborn as a man who preyed upon women? If he had any choice at all, he would have gladly become Leon instead. His spiral of thoughts was suddenly broken by the sound of the door creaking open. A maid stepped inside, her beauty weighed down by a sorrowful look. Without hesitation, she dropped to her knees and begged forgiveness for entering without permission. Zenon froze, bewildered. Who was she? She explained softly that the young master rarely stirred when she knocked, so she often entered uninvited, and for that she could only apologize. Then, without warning, she began to undress. Turning her back to him, she exposed pale skin marked with faint scars. She whispered that he could punish her as he always did. Panic gripped him. Punish her? As usual. The realization struck hard. Those marks, lash scars. Did the real Zenon torment this poor girl every single day? Was the real Zenon truly the kind of man who whipped her every day? What a wretched excuse for a human. But here was the problem: he wasn't Zenon. And if he suddenly acted too kind, people might notice something was off. So, he chose a middle path. He draped a piece of clothing over the maid's bare back and said calmly that she would not be punished today. Still, to keep up appearances, he added that under normal circumstances, she would have received 10 lashes. Then he ordered her to dress herself again. As he glanced down at his own outfit, he noticed everything he wore was black. Yes, these were without a doubt the real Zenon's clothes. Once the maid was clothed again, she bowed and quietly asked what he wished her to do next. Now that he had the chance to really look at her, he realized her face was surprisingly beautiful. Who would have thought such a lovely girl would be treated like a background character in the game? For now, he asked her something simple: the date. She replied softly it was April 5th, year 101 of the Slayer calendar. That confirmed it. He really was inside the world of Danure. And April 5th. Yes, he remembered it well. That was the very day of the Royal Academy's entrance ceremony in the capital. His lips curved into a small smile. So, it seemed he would be starting at the academy today. But before he could get too far with that thought, the maid spoke up again. She asked if he wasn't going to do his morning training. Training? He blinked in surprise. She explained that he practiced every morning without fail, so she assumed today would be no different. This was news to him. The original Zenon training daily. That was never shown in Danure 2. He had never imagined the man he hated might have been hardworking in his own way. The maid asked if he wanted to head straight to breakfast since he had skipped his training. No, he needed to stay in character. So instead, he ordered her to take him to the training grounds. When they arrived, he immediately noticed the place looked rough, scarred from constant use. Was this really Zenon's training space? He picked up a sword and gave it a few test swings. To his surprise, the movements felt natural, as if this body had always been his. Bit by bit, he was growing used to being in Zenon's skin. He didn't know the first thing about martial arts, but he understood one truth: you can't rely on talent alone. That's when he spotted several practice targets lined up. Extending his hand, he summoned one of Zenon's skills, Dark Blade. With a flash, Every strike landed cleanly at the center. He remembered that Zenon was known for mastering dark magic, making him dangerous as both a swordsman and a caster. But the thought gnawed at him: how could someone this disciplined and capable end up as the kind of man who stole others' lovers? He shook the thought away. What mattered now was learning everything about the real Zenon. And then it struck him: the reason he hated Zenon so much was because of what happened later in Danure 2. But today was only the entrance ceremony of the Royal Academy. This was the very beginning of the game's story. That meant, technically, Zenon hadn't stolen anyone yet. For the first time, he realized he didn't really have a reason to hate this version of Zenon at all. Now that he was living in Zenon's body, he made a silent vow. He would never allow things to spiral into the twisted paths of the second game. If anything, he could even help Leon defeat the Demon King, or at the very least, steer clear of danger altogether. With this resolve, he imagined living a peaceful school life. Just then, the maid returned, this time with another girl by her side. One carried a basin of water for the young master, while the other brought fresh towels and a change of clothes. He gave them a simple word of thanks. That one word stopped Leviana in her tracks. She froze like a statue, as if the world itself had come to a halt. As he wiped sweat from his body, he noticed her trembling. Why was she reacting like this? The truth hit him: Zenon had never thanked her. Not once. Her name slipped out in a whisper: Leviana. She nearly collapsed at the sound, her knees weak from shock. In his mind, he cursed the old Zenon. Was he really such a vile man that he couldn't even show basic manners? Quickly, he decided to improvise. With a calm smile, he told Leviana that he had always been grateful for her service. He admitted he was too shy to say it until now, but in truth, her support meant everything to him. The effect was immediate. Leviana's eyes welled with tears, her voice breaking as she called this the happiest day of her life. She sobbed openly, overcome with joy from a simple thank you. To him, it was shocking how much must she have suffered if such a small kindness could move her this deeply. Inside, he swore again, he couldn't become the villain Zenon was. Even if someday his mask slipped, he would act as if he had changed for the better while he still could. But then, something unexpected happened. Leviana's sorrow shifted into something far more intense. Her gaze burned with devotion, her trembling hands pressed to her chest as she declared she had been rewarded. Fearful obedience gave way to an obsession so sudden it left him unsettled. Zenon calmly told Leviana that she was overreacting. It was entirely his fault for never thanking her before, and from now on, he would rely on her more. Her eyes sparkled at that, excitement mixed with relief. Soon, it was time to leave for school. Even the carriage matched his dark, imposing aesthetic. As he was about to climb aboard, Leviana called out, her voice trembling and tears in her eyes, wishing him to take care of himself. The depth of her change confirmed his suspicions. She must have endured daily hardship at the hands of the real Zenon. Now, even a small act of kindness had completely opened her heart. He shook his head and told the coachman to go. Finally, a moment to himself. It was time to think seriously about how far he should follow the original scenario without causing trouble. Today's entrance ceremony marked the start of Danure 2. In the game, it would take Leon 2 years to defeat the Demon King alongside the heroines. As Leon's classmate, Zenon wondered how much he could involve himself in the main story without stepping on dangerous ground. He had already decided he would never cheat or steal someone else's girlfriend. What he sought was pure love, not the twisted path of the original Zenon. The game's story was clear. Zenon's role led the despairing hero to resurrect the Demon King, who would then unleash devastating magic, destroying the royal capital and everyone in it. But as he thought it through, he realized it didn't have to happen. If he simply avoided stealing anyone, that chain of events could be stopped. He would leave Leon to face the Demon King and ignore the rest of the scenario. It was settled. He would not walk the path of the villain Zenon, he would forge his own way. Zenon arrived at the academy sooner than expected. He lifted his gaze toward the towering archway at the entrance, and for a moment, he simply stood there, stunned. This was at the very place where the story of Dungeon Brave Soul had unfolded. Now it wasn't just a game screen, he was really here. Taking a breath, he pushed himself forward. The grounds were already crowded with students, their chatter filling the air. To steady his nerves, he whispered a quiet pep talk under his breath. Feeling anxious over something he had seen countless times in the game felt pathetic. He should know this place like the back of his hand. But then came the first surprise. The students weren't just ignoring him, they were avoiding him outright. Every time he came close, they stepped aside, their eyes wary, as if he carried some sort of curse. The reaction was so obvious it made his chest tighten. Still, he lowered his energy and forced himself to stay calm. The schedule ran through his mind. First, the entrance ceremony in the auditorium. Then, class orientation. After that came the moment he had been waiting for. The legendary social gathering event where the heroines would reach out to Leon. Just imagining it lit a grin across his face. Unfortunately, that grin looked anything but friendly. A group of girls nearby stiffened in fear, shrinking away. Even when he tried to reassure them with a simple smile, it twisted into something unsettling. Their faces turned pale, and he realized right away it wasn't their fault. It was his. Suppressing a sigh, he turned away and made a note to himself. No smiling at strangers. Not here. Not now. Inside the auditorium, nothing changed. Rows of seats filled quickly, but not a single person chose the space beside him. He sat alone, surrounded by empty chairs, a heavy silence pressing on his shoulders. For the first time, the loneliness struck him hard. His chest ached, and his eyes began to sting. Here he was, Zenon, yet utterly alone. Still, no matter how much he tried to distract himself, the truth remained: he was Zenon Baskerville. The cruel villain, the woman stealer, the wretched role in this tale. He told himself he wasn't lonely, even though the empty space around him said otherwise. After a while, the last of the students filed into the auditorium. The air grew quiet as the head instructor stepped forward and announced he would reveal the students who scored the highest on the entrance exams. Zenon instantly recognized this part of the story. This was the moment the heroes made their entrance. The first name called, ranking 5th, was Uranus. She rose gracefully from her seat, her presence lighting up the room. A noble's daughter from the frontier, and more importantly, Leon's childhood friend. Back in their village days, it was Shell who encouraged Leon to chase his dream of studying at this academy. Her first class was that of a mage, standing at the rear and commanding powerful offensive spells. In Zenon's memory, she was a bright, curious girl who always seemed full of life. Fourth place went to Nagisa Sekai. Her appearance alone made it clear she hailed from an eastern land, steeped in samurai traditions. The daughter of a dojo master, Nagisa carried herself with sharp discipline. Yet there was a shadow lingering inside her heart. A central part of her journey was whether she could overcome that darkness. Her class was swordsman, and her blade of choice was a katana. When it came to speed, even Leon would struggle to keep up with her. Then, in third place, Aerith Centria was called. A daughter of nobility, her father a high-ranking cardinal. She looked every bit the refined lady she was meant to be. Her beauty was unmatched, her charm radiant, and her figure was the kind of perfection that made her stand out among the heroines. Her starting class was cleric, her path tied closely to her family's church. Yet for all her grace, Zenon couldn't forget she was the unfortunate heroine destined to be taken and broken, both body and spirit, by Zenon Baskerville himself. Now that he was here, our protagonist swore he would never let that tragic future play out. He was so deep in his own thoughts, grinning over how adorable all the heroines looked, that he didn't even notice when the headmaster called his name Zenon Baskerville, announcing him as the academy's runner-up in second place. Lost in daydreams, he kept smiling to himself, wondering how he should act and whether he ought to get involved with them this time. The headmaster called his name again, louder and sharper, snapping him out of his haze. Only then did he realize the entire hall was staring at him, brows furrowed in irritation. Too late, he had missed the perfect moment to stand up when his name was first called. Whispers began spreading through the crowd, the sound of his family name rolling off their tongues. Baskerville. A noble house, yes, but one stained with infamy. Some claimed they had arranged the assassination of the previous king. Others said their bloodline was tied to the criminal guilds. There were even rumors that they plotted with neighboring nations in secret. This was bad. He hadn't meant to draw attention, but now every eye was on him. The headmaster shook his head in disappointment and began to lecture him. He admitted Zenon's ambition to rise higher was admirable for a son of such powerful lineage. But this was the Royal Sword and Magic Academy. Here, commoner or noble, all stood on equal ground. Titles and blood meant nothing within these walls. The headmaster's stern voice cut into him, telling him to abandon any arrogance and to never act with such disrespect again. But the truth was painful. He hadn't meant to act rude at all. He had simply missed the timing. What now? Should he stand up? If he does, won't it just look pathetic? And if he makes a fool of himself here, he might paint a target on his back for bullies later. In the end, he stays seated. From his chair, he bows his head slightly and apologizes to the headmaster, promising he'll remember the man's advice. The room goes silent. Too silent. That's when he feels the stares every heroine in the hall is watching him. In his own mind, he swears he meant the apology sincerely, even if it might have come out sounding arrogant. The headmaster narrows his eyes. To everyone else, it looks like Zenon Baskerville is being defiant, as if he has no intention of changing his behavior. Great. Somehow, he just made things worse. But didn't he apologize? He isn't trying to be rebellious. He's not the villain everyone thinks he is. Luckily, the headmaster decides to let it go. After all, today is meant to be a celebration, not a scolding. Still, the man warns that if Zenon shows no signs of improvement in the future, there may be consequences. That thought leaves him rattled. What exactly had the real Zenon done before this? He honestly believed the issue was only that he didn't stand when his name was called. In truth, he just wasn't used to hearing himself called by Zenon, so his reaction had been delayed. The ceremony continues, and at last, the top student is announced. First place, Leon Brave, the class president. A handsome blonde boy, the son of a true hero. Leon carries the power to seal the Demon King, the one and only protagonist of Danure. Though born a commoner, he's brilliant, skilled, and admired by everyone, especially the heroines. His starting role is Rune Knight, a rare class that combines swordsmanship with magic. In the game, only 2 people ever held that job. Our protagonist's eyes fix on Leon as the blonde boy rises to his feet. Having played through Danure so many times, he can't help but admire the sight of the game's true hero standing in the flesh. But then Leon's gaze shifts toward him and sharpens into a glare. Zenon stiffens. Why? Why would Leon look at him like that? He hasn't stolen any heroines, not yet. There's no reason for such hatred. Confusion lingers in his chest as the headmaster instructs Leon to deliver the greeting on behalf of the new students. Leon steps forward and walks to the podium with steady confidence. Meanwhile, Zenon's mind spins, wondering if his own awkward behavior earlier somehow offended him. Did his late response during roll call bother Leon? The speech begins. Leon speaks of his humble roots, how he was born a simple commoner in the countryside, and how under normal circumstances, he wouldn't even have the chance to stand here. Yet here he is, a student of the Royal Sword and Magic Academy. He gives heartfelt thanks to his parents, and also to Shell's parents, who raised him and guided him like their own child. He extends his gratitude to the faculty and upperclassmen as well. Listening to all this, Zenon half expected something more dramatic, like Leon boldly declaring himself a future hero. That would have been fitting for the game's protagonist. But instead, his words are plain and sincere, almost disappointingly so. Then Leon continues, stating the real reason he came to this academy: to grow stronger, so he can protect the kingdom. Though the Slayer's kingdom enjoys peace now, evil still lurks in the shadows, and people continue to suffer. He vows to fight against that evil, to become strong enough to guard his homeland. Hearing this, Zenon finds himself nodding in quiet approval. But then Leon takes his speech one step further. He declares that the evil he spoke of isn't far away, it's here, sitting among them as a fellow student. The room freezes. Murmurs ripple through the crowd. Zenon blinks, stunned. What? That wasn't in the script. And then he realizes Leon's eyes are fixed directly on him, sharp and unwavering. Why? Why is the protagonist glaring at him like an enemy? He hasn't done a single thing yet. Where is this hatred coming from? Zenon's thoughts race. In the first Danure game, his character was nothing more than a nameless extra, barely worth a mention. But in Danure 2, things changed. Suddenly, he was rewritten as a villain with a tragic backstory and even promoted to a rival role. It was almost like the developers forced the two games together and twisted the plot. If that's the case, then maybe Leon's hostility is part of that rewritten script, targeting him whether he deserves it or not. And if the story's already bending in strange directions, then who's to say the ending will stay the same? What if Leon never defeats the Demon King? What if the world itself collapses into ruin? The thought gnaws at him, but the ceremony moves on. With the rankings announced, the head teacher dismisses the students to their classrooms. Zenon follows the flow of the crowd, finds a seat, and sits quietly. His mind, however, refuses to settle. If the story has really shifted, then all the knowledge he gained from the game might be useless here. For now, Zenon decides to do nothing reckless. Survival comes first, and that means playing it smart. He sets two simple rules for himself. Don't interfere with Leon's path, and don't cause trouble that could disturb the hero's peaceful school life. The problem? Leon keeps glaring at him anyway, like he's already guilty of something. Those sharp looks feel less like suspicion and more like an outright accusation. Zenon can only avert his gaze, pretending not to notice. Still, there's another path he could take, one far safer than being treated as an enemy. He could try joining Leon's party and help fight the Demon King. In the game, Zenon ranked as the third strongest character, only behind Leon and the Demon King himself. If they work together, defeat the final boss, and save the world, then maybe everyone can enjoy a peaceful school life. But that's a plan for later. Right now, he can't even figure out how to deal with Leon's burning stare. Keeping the storyline of Danure 1 on track is already proving harder than expected. Especially since this version of Zenon was supposed to be a noble, pure-hearted student, and that's the role he has to play now. Class goes on, and Zenon finally notices the teacher at the front. In the game, even this teacher fell into darkness because of Zenon's corruption. But now, with him controlling the body, he swears that fate won't repeat itself. Though, why did the old Zenon even do that in the first place? No time to dwell on it. The scene skips forward to the end of class. The teacher announces that everyone is free to check out club activities. Soon, the academy's halls fill with chatter and footsteps as students scatter to explore. Leon, naturally, has his admirers flocking around him. And Zenon? He walks the corridors alone. People say the first few seconds decide everything: likes, dislikes, and impressions. For Zenon, that's a curse. His sharp eyes and ominous aura already put others on edge, and it doesn't help that he bears the name of the infamous Marquis family, feared for their cruelty across the kingdom. With little else to do at the academy, he heads home to gather his thoughts. A dark, ornate carriage carries him back, its presence as heavy as his family name. When he steps down, a familiar voice rings out through the hall's Leviana, the loyal maid, greeting him with her usual composure. Her sudden appearance startles him. How long has she been waiting there? Isn't it freezing outside? She brushes off his concern with a calm smile, taking his coat and informing him that his father is calling. He is expected in the office immediately. A grim shadow falls across Zenon's already brooding face, and even Leviana notices. Grandolph Baskerville, his father, is no ordinary noble. In the kingdom, he is the ruler of the night, the man who drags the Baskerville name into darkness. In the game's lore, Grandolph is the root of Zenon's downfall, the one who led him astray. A tyrant beyond compare, he commands the underworld, oversees the criminal guild, and deals in every vile act imaginable. Organized crime, trafficking, slavery, the list goes on. And worst of all, he controls assassins like puppets, burying all evidence in shadows. Some even whisper that Grandolph Baskerville might be nothing less than a fragment of the Demon King himself. As for Zenon, no matter how much he wants to distance himself from the real Zenon's family affairs, there's no escaping this. After all, blood ties are chains he can't break. Zenon makes his way to his father's office, knocking lightly before stepping inside. The moment his foot crosses the threshold, crimson chains whip through the air and bind his body, slamming him helpless to the floor. A cold voice greets him. It has been some time since father and son last stood face to face. There he is, Grandolph Baskerville. The man radiates darkness itself. A master of forbidden magic, he uses the spell Bloody Chain, a sinister technique that locks down its victim while slowly tearing away at their life force. It isn't just restraint, it's torture. Grandolph glares down at his son with disgust. His boot crashes into Zenon's side once, twice, again and again. The crime? Placing second in the entrance exam. In his father's eyes, anything less than first is unforgivable. Is this what it means to be the heir of the Baskerville bloodline? He spits, raining blows upon his son. The Baskervilles rule the shadows of the kingdom, and for them, only strength decides worth. To falter is to disgrace the family. And so, Grandolph continues his merciless assault, declaring that weakness has no place in their name. Zenon can barely keep his eyes open under the pain, his body trembling. His father sneers at his pitiful state, calling him pathetic for failing to endure even this much. Then comes the promise: if Zenon does not claim the top rank in the next exam, far worse punishments await. With that, Grandolph turns away, his cloak trailing like a shadow. He declares he'll be away on business, leaving his son in the care of the steward. Zenon is to obey every command and never skip his training. Only then might he be deemed worthy of the Baskerville name. Zenon staggered out of his father's study, his body battered and covered in bruises. Just as he was about to collapse, Leviana was there, catching him in her arms. She held him close and quickly pressed a potion to his lips, whispering that she'd heal him right away. By the time he regained consciousness, night had already fallen. The pain in his body was fading as the potion worked its magic, closing his wounds one by one. Beside him, Leviana had fallen asleep at his bedside, her head resting gently against the sheets. Seeing her like this, Zenon couldn't stop himself from quietly admitting how kind she was. But even as the thought crossed his mind, bitterness followed. Someone like her, so gentle and loyal, was wasting that kindness on him, a man doomed to play the role of a villain. He couldn't understand why she stayed by his side. The memory of his father's blows suddenly flashed back, making his body ache all over again. It was hard to believe someone could treat their own child with such cruelty. Yet there was no doubt Grandolph Baskerville was the reason Zenon's life had gone astray. Years of daily torment had worn him down, both in body and spirit. Eventually, the pressure broke him, twisting his mind until he snapped. That was the path that led Zenon to betray Leon, frame him, and steal away the heroines in the story. When compared side by side, the difference was obvious. Leon was the golden boy descendant of a hero, admired by all, cherished by the heroines, and ranked at the very top of the class. And then there was Zenon, born into a cursed family, hated by many, and beaten down by a father who never once showed him love. Thinking it over, Zenon realized why the original game's version of him had spiraled down such a cruel path. Leon had everything he lacked: power, admiration, love, and the glory of defeating the Demon King. It made sense that the old Zenon's heart must have been twisted with envy, poisoned by hatred toward the shining hero. And in the end, his revenge had been merciless, stealing away every heroine who should have belonged to Leon. But our Zenon, the one now living in this world, would choose differently. He had set his eyes on a new goal, one far more pressing than even the Demon King. Before anything else, there was someone he needed to defeat, Grandolph Baskerville, the wicked man who called himself his father. That monster wasn't just an obstacle, he was an enemy who should never have existed. If Zenon wanted to live freely and truly enjoy this world, then he had to break free from both the script written by the Danure staff and the chains of the Baskerville bloodline. Just then, Leviana stirred in her sleep. She blinked awake, spotted her young master watching her, and immediately rushed to him. Tears spilled from her eyes as she wrapped him in a desperate hug, pressing his face into her chest as she cried. He could only manage a muffled protest before fainting once more in her arms. Leviana panicked, shaking him and sobbing harder, terrified for his condition. Meanwhile, as the night grew darker and his strength slowly began to return, Zenon quietly set his mind to work. He started writing down everything he remembered from the game, the characters, the storylines, every important detail. He needed to confirm how closely this world matched the one he knew, and whether his knowledge could still guide him through what was to come. To make sure his notes would be clear and easy to follow, Zenon wrote everything down in Japanese. These records would serve as a guide for what was to come, especially when it came to collecting the key items he absolutely needed. Once finished, he carefully gathered the pages together and stored them away for safekeeping. The next challenge was harder, figuring out how to survive in this strange reality. He still didn't know why he had been sent here in the first place, but none of that changed the truth. He was now Zenon Baskerville, and if he wanted to keep living as Zenon, then his first enemy would have to be Grandolph. Still, another question gnawed at him: was leaving the Baskerville estate even possible? If he tried, Grandolph might unleash criminals or assassins to drag him back. Worse, stepping too far from the story's path could make Leon's future actions harder to predict. Ideally, the tale would unfold just like in Danure, the Demon King sealed away, the hero victorious. But if Leon failed his battle, then the world itself would collapse into ruin. That night, as Zenon sat on his bed lost in thought, one thing became clear: he needed strength. To grow stronger, he had to hone his skills, but before that, he needed to know what he already had. He whispered, "Status," and a glowing prompt appeared before his eyes, displaying his information. Danure had no levels, only skills that gained proficiency the more they were used. Glancing over the details, Zenon discovered his class matched Leon's magic swordsman. But as his gaze fell on the actual numbers listed beneath, his expression darkened. Those stats were nothing to smile about. Zenon lowered his head with a sigh. Training had raised his proficiency, but what good would that do? Swordsmanship and dark magic made sense, but one of the skills shown was something he prayed he'd never have to use. At least his combat stats were still at 0, which meant there was room to grow. To get stronger, he would need new skills and to keep building his proficiency. Once certain abilities reached a high enough level, the door to advanced classes would open. That meant one thing: he had to gather items. Weapons and armor could boost his strength, while rare items could unlock entirely new spells and techniques. Accessories, charms, even talismans that reduced damage were all worth seeking out. These were the treasures he absolutely had to claim. But how to obtain them? There were 3 main ways. He could buy them in shops, risk his life in dungeons to find them, or earn them as rewards from team events. Some treasures, however, appeared only at auctions, and those demanded a fortune to win. Dungeon loot was also unpredictable; one could never be sure what would appear. As for event rewards, Zenon decided to leave those untouched. They belonged to Leon, the destined hero. If Leon missed out, it might weaken him in the fight against the Demon King, and the world itself could fall because of it. Zenon's goal was still clear: avoid the main plotline of Danure. That meant becoming strong on his own terms, but without interfering with Leon's path. A gentle knock pulled Zenon out of his thoughts. Leviana stepped inside, carefully pushing a tray of food. She worried he might still be feeling weak, so she brought breakfast straight to him. The timing was perfect; his stomach was already starting to growl. Sitting down at the table, Zenon noticed something right away. Every dish she prepared had a hidden effect. The sandwich and soup restored health, while the steaming cup of coffee could cure status ailments. Just from this meal alone, he could feel how much Leviana cared for him. He thanked her with a small smile. But Leviana quickly shook her head, saying she was only doing her duty as a maid. To her, it wasn't anything special. Even so, Zenon repeated his thanks, and that made her face burn red as tears welled up in her eyes. Then, to his surprise, drops of blood hit the floor. Before he could ask, Leviana clutched her nose, stammered an apology, and hurried toward the door, promising to clean up later. Zenon just sat there in shock. A stunning girl like Leviana had gotten so flustered from a simple thank you that she ended up with a nosebleed. It was both terrifying and strangely adorable. It left him wondering just how much did Leviana actually admire him. Still, when he thought about it, the original Zenon already had plenty of loyal allies. There was never any reason for him to steal another man's lover in the first place.